I thought my husband and I had a normal marriage. Not perfect, not like the couples you see in movies, but stable, safe, real. We had been together for 10 years. 10 long years of shared dinners, quiet weekends, small arguments about stupid things like whose turn it was to take out the trash. 10 years of believing I knew the man sleeping beside me every night. But everything I believed about my life collapsed in less than 30 seconds. And it happened at a funeral. A little girl walked up to me, looked straight into my eyes with a serious expression far too old for her small face, and asked a question that made my entire body go cold. "Are you the woman who stole my dad?" At first I thought I misunderstood her. Funerals are emotional places. People say strange things when they're grieving. But then she added something that made the air feel heavy in my lungs. "My mom said you're the reason he left us." And the worst part? She was talking about my husband. His name is Daniel. For 10 years, I believed Daniel was the most honest man I had ever met. He was calm, thoughtful, dependable. The kind of man who fixed broken things around the house without being asked. The kind of man who remembered small details about people. He remembered birthdays. He remembered my favorite coffee order. He remembered the name of my childhood dog. So when I say that, I trusted him completely. I mean it. Which is why the moment I stepped inside that funeral home, something immediately felt wrong. The funeral was for Daniel's aunt. At least that's what he told me 3 days earlier when he mentioned the trip. "She passed away last week," he said quietly while we were eating dinner. "Were you close?" I asked. Daniel shrugged. "Not really, but family is family." I offered to go with him. For a moment he hesitated, just a brief pause. Then he smiled and said, "Sure." At the time, I thought nothing about that hesitation. Now I realize it was the first crack in the story he had been building for 10 years. The funeral was held in a small town about 2 hours from our home. Daniel said he grew up there but hadn't visited in years. That had always seemed strange to me. In an entire decade of marriage, I had never met most of his relatives. I had never seen the house he grew up in. I had never visited this town. Whenever I asked about it, Daniel always brushed the topic aside. "They're complicated. We're not very close anymore. My family and I don't really talk." Those answers sounded believable enough that eventually I stopped asking questions. But the moment we walked into the funeral home, something felt off. People were standing in quiet groups, speaking softly to each other. But the second Daniel and I entered the room, several conversations stopped, heads turned, eyes followed us. Or more specifically, they followed me. At first I tried to ignore it. Maybe they were simply curious about the unfamiliar face. But then I noticed something else. Daniel suddenly seemed nervous. His hand tightened around mine for a moment. Then slowly, he let go. "I need to talk to someone," he said quickly. Before I could respond, he walked away across the room. That left me standing alone among strangers who were now clearly watching me. I forced a polite smile and pretended to look at the memorial photos near the front of the room. But I could still feel their eyes. Then I noticed a woman standing near the wall. She was staring directly at me. Not a curious glance, a hard stare. Her expression looked angry, almost offended. When our eyes met, she quickly looked away. My stomach tightened. Something about this place felt deeply wrong. And then I saw the children. Near the doorway stood a young boy and a little girl. They were whispering to each other while occasionally glancing in my direction. The boy looked around 8 years old. The girl was younger, maybe 6. After a moment, the girl let go of the boy's hand and began walking toward me, slowly, carefully. At first, I assumed she was just curious. Kids sometimes approach strangers without hesitation. But when she stopped in front of me, she didn't look shy at all. She looked serious. Her eyes studied my face like she was comparing me to something she'd heard before. Then she asked quietly, "Are you Emily?" My heart skipped. "Yes, I am." The girl nodded slowly. Then she took a deep breath and asked the question that shattered my world. "Are you the woman who married my dad?" My chest tightened. "What?" I whispered. But before I could say anything else, the girl added something even worse. "My mom says you stole him from us." And at that exact moment, I heard my husband's voice behind me, panicked. "Lily, stop." When I turned around, Daniel was standing only a few steps away, but he didn't look like the calm, confident man I'd lived with for 10 years. He looked terrified. His face had gone pale, and his eyes were locked on the little girl standing in front of me. "Lily," he said quickly, forcing a weak smile, "you shouldn't bother strangers." Strangers. The word sounded strange in my ears because the girl clearly knew his name, and he clearly knew hers. The girl frowned. "I'm not bothering her," she said stubbornly. "I just asked if she's Emily." Daniel stepped forward and gently placed a hand on her shoulder. "That's enough," he said quietly, but his voice sounded tight, controlled, like someone trying very hard not to panic. By now my heart was beating faster. "Daniel," I said slowly, "who is she?" For a moment he didn't answer, and that silence felt heavier than any explanation. Finally he sighed and rubbed his forehead. "She's a distant relative." A distant relative. But before I could react, the girl suddenly stepped around him. "Dad, why are you lying again?" The word hit me like a physical blow. Dad. Everything inside me froze. I looked at Daniel, waiting, begging silently for him to laugh and say the girl was confused, but he didn't. He didn't correct her. He didn't deny it. He simply stood there staring at the floor, like a man who had just been caught in something he could no longer hide. My voice came out quiet and shaky. "Daniel, what did she just call you?" He opened his mouth, but before he could answer, another voice cut through the room. Sharp, cold. "That's because he is her father." I turned toward the voice. A woman was walking toward us from the other side of the funeral hall. She looked tired, exhausted, and very angry. The moment Daniel saw her, his shoulders tensed. "Oh no," he muttered under his breath. The woman stopped a few feet away. Her eyes moved slowly from Daniel to me. "You must be Emily," she said calmly. I nodded slowly. "Yes. Who are you?" The woman let out a short, bitter laugh. "I'm the woman your husband abandoned." My stomach dropped. I looked at Daniel again, expecting him to interrupt, to deny it, to say this was some kind of misunderstanding. But he stayed silent. The woman crossed her arms. "For 10 years, she continued, Daniel told our kids he was working out of town. Our kids, plural. The little boy from earlier had now walked closer. He stood beside the girl, holding her hand tightly. Both children were staring at Daniel, like they had been waiting a long time to see him. The woman gestured toward them. "That's Lily," she said, "and that's Noah." My chest tightened, because now that I looked closer, I could see it, the resemblance. Noah had Daniel's eyes, Lily had his smile. Suddenly, dozens of memories rushed through my mind. Every business trip, every late weekend, every mysterious phone call he took outside. All the small things I ignored because I trusted him. I slowly turned toward Daniel. "How long?" I asked quietly. He didn't answer immediately. His hands were shaking slightly. Finally, he whispered something so quiet I almost didn't hear it. Since before we met. My entire body went cold, because that meant only one thing. But the woman wasn't finished. She looked straight into my eyes. You didn't know, did you? I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight. Then she said the words that shattered the last piece of my reality. You're not the first wife. The room suddenly felt silent, like the air had been sucked out of it. But the woman leaned closer and added one more sentence, a sentence that made my heart drop even further. Actually, you're the third. And at that moment, I realized my husband's secrets were far bigger than I had ever imagined. For a few seconds after she said it, I couldn't hear anything. Not the quiet conversations in the room, not the soft music playing near the front, not even my own breathing. 3. The word echoed in my mind like a bell that wouldn't stop ringing. You're the third. I stared at the woman, waiting for her to say something else, waiting for her to explain that this was some kind of cruel joke. But her expression didn't change. She looked completely serious. Slowly, I turned my head toward Daniel, my husband, the man I had trusted with my entire life, the man who now looked like a stranger standing a few feet away from me. Daniel, I said quietly, tell me she's lying. For a moment, he didn't answer. His eyes moved between me, the woman, and the 2 children standing beside her. Then he rubbed his face with both hands like someone who had been awake for days. It's not what you think, he said. I almost laughed, because those were the most predictable words he could have said. What do I think? I asked. My voice sounded strangely calm, even though inside my chest everything felt like it was collapsing. You think I've been living a double life, he said quietly. I stared at him. You have been living a double life. He opened his mouth to argue, but no words came out. The woman beside the children crossed her arms again. Go ahead, Daniel, she said coldly. Explain it to her. He looked at her with frustration. Rachel, this isn't the time. Rachel. So that was her name. She laughed bitterly. Oh, I think this is the perfect time. Several people nearby had started paying attention now. Conversations had slowed. Eyes were watching us. It suddenly felt like the entire room had turned into an audience. Daniel lowered his voice. Emily, can we talk somewhere else? I didn't move. No, he sighed. Please. But before I could answer, the little girl, Lily, spoke again. Dad, why didn't you come to Noah's birthday? The question hit the room like a stone dropped into water. Daniel closed his eyes. Lily, you promised, she continued quietly. Her voice wasn't angry. It was worse. It sounded hurt, like she had asked this question many times before. I waited all day, she said. Daniel looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. I had work, he muttered. The boy, Noah, finally spoke. That's what you always say. I felt something twist painfully inside my chest because suddenly I realized something horrifying. These children believed Daniel was their father, not just biologically, emotionally, and from the way they spoke, they were used to being disappointed by him. Rachel shook her head slowly. You see, she said to me, this is who your husband really is. I felt dizzy. 10 years of memories were suddenly rearranging themselves in my mind. Every business trip, every time he said he had to travel for work, every weekend he claimed he was visiting old friends. All of it suddenly looked different. I looked back at Daniel. How often? I asked quietly. He frowned. What? How often were you here? I asked. He didn't answer. Once a month, I continued. Every few weeks? Still silence. Then Rachel answered for him. Whenever he felt guilty enough. Daniel shot her an angry look. That's not fair. She laughed. Not fair? Her voice was rising now. You disappeared for months at a time, Daniel? The boy tugged lightly on her sleeve. Mom. But Rachel was too angry to stop. You think sending a few birthday gifts makes you a father? She continued. Daniel stepped closer to her. Rachel, please. But she wasn't looking at him anymore. She was looking at me. You deserve to know who you married. My stomach tightened again. Tell her, Rachel said to Daniel. He looked exhausted. Tell me what? I asked. Rachel's voice became quiet. Too quiet. Tell her why you really came to this funeral. Daniel's head snapped toward her. Don't. But she ignored him. You think he came here because his aunt died? She asked me. I nodded slowly. That's what he told me. Rachel's expression darkened. Well. She paused for a moment. Then she said something that made Daniel suddenly step forward in panic. But he was too late. His aunt didn't leave him memories, Rachel said. She left him money. Daniel grabbed her arm. Rachel, stop. But the damage was already done. I looked at him slowly. Money? Rachel pulled her arm away. Yes, she said calmly. A lot of it. My heart started beating faster again. How much? I asked. Rachel looked directly at Daniel before answering. About $2 million. The room suddenly felt smaller. 2 million. I looked at Daniel. Is that true? He didn't answer. Rachel folded her arms. And guess who was in the will? Daniel whispered something under his breath, but Rachel finished the sentence anyway. Not you, she said. She pointed toward the children. Them. My heart skipped a beat, because suddenly I understood why Daniel looked so terrified when we walked in. But Rachel, the silence after Rachel's words felt suffocating. $2 million. The number echoed in my head. But it wasn't the money that made my stomach twist. It was the way Daniel was standing there now, frozen, like a man who had just been exposed in front of everyone. I looked at him carefully, and suddenly I noticed something I hadn't seen before. He wasn't just nervous. He looked desperate. Rachel, he said quietly, you're making this worse. She raised an eyebrow. Worse? You're telling her half the story. Daniel looked at me. Emily, please. But Rachel shook her head. No, you've had 10 years to tell the truth. Her voice was calm again now, almost too calm. Maybe it's time she hears the rest. I crossed my arms slowly. Yes, I said. I think it is. Daniel ran a hand through his hair. This isn't the place. Really? Rachel said with a bitter smile. You didn't think that when you showed up here pretending to be the grieving nephew. Several people nearby were openly staring now. Daniel looked around the room uncomfortably. Then he turned back to me. I was going to tell you. When? I asked. He hesitated, and that hesitation answered my question. Rachel laughed softly. Exactly. Daniel's voice became defensive. I didn't plan any of this. Rachel stepped closer to him. You planned enough. Her eyes narrowed. You planned 10 years of lies. Daniel looked like he wanted to argue, but he couldn't, because every person in the room could see the truth written all over his face. I suddenly remembered something. Something small. But now it felt important. Daniel? I said slowly. He looked at me. Yes? You said your aunt wasn't very close to you? Rachel let out another bitter laugh. Oh, that's rich. Daniel's shoulders tensed. Rachel. But she was already speaking. She raised him. I blinked. What? Rachel nodded toward Daniel. His parents died when he was 16. The room felt strangely quiet. And his aunt took him in, she continued. She paid for his college. She helped him start his first job. I slowly turned toward Daniel. You told me you barely knew her. Daniel looked down at the floor. I didn't want to talk about it. Rachel shook her head. No, she said. You didn't want Emily asking questions. Daniel suddenly snapped. Enough? The room went silent. Even the children looked startled. Daniel took a deep breath, then looked at me again. I didn't lie about everything, he said. But Rachel interrupted immediately. Just the important parts. My mind felt like it was spinning now. Okay, I said slowly. Let's be clear. I pointed toward Lily and Noah. These are your children. Daniel nodded once. Yes. My chest tightened. And Rachel. I looked at her. You were married to him? She shook her head. No. Daniel spoke quietly. We were engaged. I blinked again. Engaged? Rachel crossed her arms. We were together for 5 years. My stomach dropped. And when did you meet me? I asked Daniel. He didn't answer. Rachel did. While we were still together. The words felt like a punch to my chest. I took a step back. Wait. I looked at Daniel. You cheated on her? With me? Daniel rubbed his face again. It's not that simple. Rachel laughed. It's exactly that simple. I felt suddenly cold, because that meant something else too, something even worse. Did you leave her for me? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Rachel answered again. No. She looked straight into my eyes. He never left. The room felt like it tilted. What? Rachel gestured toward the children. For years he kept promising he'd fix everything. He told me he just needed time. Daniel whispered her name. Rachel. But she kept going. Meanwhile, she said, pointing at me, he married you. I couldn't breathe. Married me. While promising her he'd come back. The room felt smaller with every second, but Rachel wasn't finished. She looked directly at Daniel. Go ahead, she said quietly. Tell her the best part. Daniel's face turned pale, but Rachel said it anyway. The night before your wedding? She paused, then finished the sentence slowly. He slept at my house. For a moment, I was sure I had heard her wrong. The room felt strangely quiet, like the air had been pulled out of it. The night before your wedding. He slept at my house. Rachel's words echoed in my mind again and again. I slowly turned my head toward Daniel, my husband, the man I had stood beside at the altar 10 years ago, the man who held my hands and promised to love me for the rest of his life. Tell me she's lying, I said quietly. My voice didn't sound like my own. It sounded distant, empty. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't even look at me. His eyes were fixed on the floor, and that silence told me everything. Rachel let out a tired breath. I didn't know about you back then, she said to me. Her voice had changed. The anger was still there, but now there was something else too. Exhaustion. He told me he was working late that night, she continued. He showed up at my door around 10. I felt my chest tighten. Rachel looked at the children for a moment before continuing. He played with the kids, she said softly. He read Lily a bedtime story. Lily looked down at the floor now, embarrassed by the attention. Rachel kept talking. Then we talked for a while after they went to bed. She paused, and yes, he stayed the night. Daniel finally looked up. Rachel, stop. But she shook her head. No. Her eyes moved back to me. You deserve to know. My stomach twisted. Why? I asked quietly. Rachel frowned. Why what? Why are you telling me all this now? I asked. She studied my face for a moment. Then she sighed. Because I only found out about you 2 weeks ago. That sentence made my heart skip. 2 weeks ago? Rachel nodded. Yes. Daniel closed his eyes. Rachel. But she ignored him. I always believed his excuses, she said. He said his job required travel. He said he was saving money so we could eventually move somewhere better. Her voice hardened again. I believed him. The children stood quietly beside her, clearly uncomfortable with the conversation. Then Rachel looked straight at me again. But 2 weeks ago, someone sent me something. My stomach tightened. What? She reached into her purse. Daniel suddenly stepped forward. Rachel, don't. But she pulled out her phone anyway. It was an anonymous message, she said. Her thumb tapped the screen. Then she held the phone toward me. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Then my breath caught. It was a photograph. A wedding photograph. My wedding photograph. Daniel and I were standing together, smiling at the camera. The same photo that had been framed on our living room shelf for 10 years. Rachel's voice was calm. That's how I found out. My hands started shaking. You had no idea? I asked. Rachel shook her head slowly. No. Daniel looked like he wanted to disappear. For 10 years, Rachel continued, I thought he was just a man trying to balance work and family. She let out a bitter laugh. But apparently he was balancing 2 families. I felt dizzy. 2 families. The words made my stomach turn, but then something else clicked in my mind. Wait, I said slowly. If you found out 2 weeks ago, why didn't you contact me? Rachel hesitated. I tried. My heart skipped again. What? She nodded toward Daniel. I called him first. Daniel looked away. He begged me not to tell you, Rachel said. The room felt suddenly very quiet. What did he say? I asked. Rachel's eyes stayed on Daniel. He said he would explain everything himself. I looked at him. Did you plan to? He didn't answer. Rachel sighed again. That's why I came today. My stomach twisted. You knew he would be here. Rachel nodded. I wanted the truth to come out in front of everyone. Daniel rubbed his face again. You're enjoying this, he muttered. Rachel's voice turned cold. No. She gestured toward the children. They deserve the truth. Lily suddenly spoke again. Mom, are we in trouble? Rachel immediately knelt beside her. No, sweetheart, she said gently. You didn't do anything wrong. The little girl looked confused. Then why is Dad upset? Daniel flinched at the word. Dad. Rachel stood up again slowly. Then she looked back at me. You want to know the worst part? She asked. I wasn't sure I did, but I nodded anyway. Rachel's expression hardened. The worst part is, she pointed at Daniel. He's still lying. Daniel looked up sharply. What? Rachel's eyes narrowed. You told Emily you came here for the funeral? Daniel's jaw tightened. I did. Rachel shook her head slowly. No. Her voice dropped lower. You came because of the will. I felt my stomach drop again. The money? I asked. Rachel nodded. Yes. Daniel tried to interrupt. That's not... But Rachel cut him off. The lawyer called him 3 days ago. My chest tightened. And do you know what the lawyer said? I swallowed. What? Rachel looked straight into my eyes. He said Daniel might inherit everything. Daniel suddenly looked panicked. Rachel, that's not confirmed. The room felt suddenly heavier, like the air itself had thickened. And the lawyer thinks someone convinced her to change it. Rachel's words hung in the silence. Slowly, I turned my head toward Daniel. My husband. But the man standing in front of me no longer looked like the person I thought I knew. He looked nervous, cornered. Daniel? I said quietly. He didn't meet my eyes. Did you know about this? For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he exhaled slowly. I only found out 3 days ago. Rachel laughed bitterly. That's convenient. Daniel turned toward her, frustration flashing across his face. It's the truth. Rachel crossed her arms. Sure. I stepped forward. Daniel, look at me. Reluctantly, he raised his eyes. I searched his face carefully. For 10 years, I had learned every expression he made, every small change in his voice, and right now, he looked like a man hiding something. Did you talk to your aunt before she died? I asked. Daniel hesitated. Rachel's eyebrows lifted slightly. Well? Daniel ran a hand through his hair. Yes, he admitted quietly. My stomach dropped. When? Last week. Rachel scoffed. Imagine that. I ignored her and focused on Daniel. What did you talk about? His voice became defensive. She wanted to see me. And? I asked. And we talked. About what? I pressed. Daniel hesitated again. Rachel shook her head slowly. You're unbelievable. Daniel shot her an angry look. You weren't there. No, Rachel replied sharply. But the nurse was? My head turned toward her. What nurse? Rachel looked back at me. The hospice nurse who was taking care of his aunt. Daniel's jaw tightened. Rachel, stop. But she continued anyway. She called me yesterday. That made both Daniel and me freeze. She called you? I asked. Rachel nodded. She recognized me from old photos. Daniel muttered something under his breath. What did she say? I asked. Rachel's voice became serious. She said Daniel visited his aunt 2 days before she died. Daniel didn't deny it. Rachel continued. And during that visit, they argued. My chest tightened. About what? Rachel looked at Daniel before answering. About money. The word felt ugly in the quiet room. Daniel shook his head. That's not what happened. Rachel's eyes narrowed. Really? He sighed. She asked me about my life. Rachel laughed again. Oh, I'm sure you told her the truth. Daniel ignored the comment. She wanted to know if I was happy. He continued. And what did you say? I asked. Daniel looked at me. I said yes. The answer felt strangely empty. Rachel shook her head slowly. The nurse said your aunt was upset after you left. Daniel rubbed his face again. She was sick. Rachel's voice sharpened. She changed her will the next morning. That sentence made the room fall silent again. I stared at Daniel. Did you ask her for the money? His head snapped up. No! The answer came too fast, too loud. Rachel tilted her head slightly. You didn't have to ask. Daniel looked furious now. You're twisting everything. Rachel stepped closer. No, Daniel. Her voice was quiet. I'm finally putting the pieces together. The children stood silently beside her, watching the adults argue in confusion. I felt suddenly exhausted. 10 years of trust were collapsing around me, piece by piece, but something about Rachel's story didn't quite fit. Wait, I said slowly. Both of them looked at me. You said the children were removed from the will. Rachel nodded. Yes. But why would his aunt do that? I asked. Rachel frowned slightly. That's the question, isn't it? Daniel suddenly spoke. She thought Rachel was irresponsible. Rachel's eyes flashed with anger. Oh, really? Daniel held his ground. She told me she didn't trust you with the money. Rachel laughed loudly. That's funny. Daniel looked irritated. Why? Rachel leaned closer. Because the nurse told me something else. Daniel went quiet. Rachel's voice dropped lower. She said your aunt didn't want to change the will. My heart skipped. What? Rachel nodded. The nurse said someone convinced her. I looked at Daniel again. Who? Rachel answered before he could. That's what the lawyer is trying to figure out. Daniel looked genuinely uncomfortable now. This is ridiculous. Rachel ignored him. The lawyer asked to meet with everyone tomorrow. I frowned. Everyone? Rachel nodded. You. She pointed at Daniel. Me. Then she pointed toward the children. And them. Daniel's face tightened. Why? Rachel's expression turned serious. Because the lawyer thinks something isn't right. The room felt colder again. What do you mean? I asked. Rachel hesitated. Then she said the words that made my heart start racing. The lawyer believes your aunt may have been manipulated, Daniel scoffed. That's insane. Rachel looked straight into his eyes. Is it? Daniel didn't respond.